job.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for coming today, and I will say right off that it's going to be an interesting little technical challenge here, running a PowerPoint and holding a microphone and looking at my notes, but we'll, we'll work it all out. Yeah, it will.
I can make it. Am I in the way?
No, I'm good. We're fine. We're fine. Thank you. So again, I just wanted to give you, I am an attorney. I worked for the Office of the Attorney General for 17 years, and in my last 7 years in the Attorney General's office, I worked for Attorney General Steve Rowe, doing his public policy, implementing his public policy initiatives statewide and nationally. And that is how I came to the issue of elder abuse. So he was quite passionate about shining a light on this very hidden issue of elder abuse, and it was my great privilege to help him create some initiatives around the state to start looking at the issue of elder abuse. So I've been doing this work for about 10 years. I also had the privilege of working for the Elder Justice Partners we had two different grants from the Violence Against Women's Office from the national to train law enforcement officers, judges, and prosecutors on elder abuse. And that project ran from about 2006 until 2010, it ended. And at the end of that grant, we actually hauled all these people together who had been passionate in this work, law enforcement officers, community-based organizations, prosecutors, and we had a little summit on elder abuse. And we said, so this grant is ending. We've done some amazing work in the state. What do we want to do? And they all said, well, we want to create a council. We want to come together as a group. And so the Maine Council for Elder Abuse Prevention was created in the very beginning of 2011. And we have been working collaboratively with about 50 organizations, from statewide organizations to law enforcement officers, every arm of law enforcement, and community-based organizations and seniors to address the issue of elder abuse in Maine. And you're going to hear a little bit more about that later on. We're bringing a podium in.
Now you're
really. Well, that's good though. I can put my notes on it, which will be so nice. Thank you. Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. Wow.
Good.
All right, maybe we can make this work. But so I wanted to essentially let you know sort of where I'm coming from and how I come to this issue. I jumped ship, just so you know how I get here. In 2009 to actually help Steve run for governor. So I ran his campaign for a year and then came to this work after that, knowing that I didn't want to be a lawyer anymore, but that I love public policy. And I wanted to do something in the area of public policy that I was passionate about, and this happens to be one of them, aging. So the area agencies on aging, I work for them, and I do advocacy at the statewide level and national level on healthy aging in Maine. So all issues around healthy aging, and this is one teeny little piece of what I do, but I'm very excited. And I will say that I think, maybe not the first in the nation, but you all are the first in the state to have a congregation of any type look at the issue of elder abuse. So you are absolutely leaders, and the fact that you all showed up today blows my mind. I mean, first of all, it's a beautiful day out there. I'd be thinking really long and hard about coming today if I were you. But really, I mean, look at how many people are in this room. It tells me, first of all, that many of you here probably know that this is a reality for people that you know. Because for a long time, as Lynn mentioned, particularly in domestic violence and child abuse, we didn't really believe these things were happening. And if they were happening, it was really a family issue, something that you stayed out of. What you'll hear today is that with elder abuse, you have really the dynamics of both of those things going on. A lot of the same dynamics around child abuse and neglect, and a lot of the same dynamics that you find in domestic violence really kind of come together in the issue of elder abuse. And it's a very complex issue, and it is hidden from view because, and you'll see a little later on, but only about 1 in 6 cases of elder abuse are ever reported, and the vast majority of them are reported by others. not my victims. There are many, many reasons why it's so hidden from view, and many things that we can all do to help victims and support victims. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to show you a couple videos very quickly.
My husband died 5.5 years ago, and David more or less took over my life. And it became more and more verbal abuse, calling me names, threatening to kill me. When Bob developed cancer, and then he eventually died. I was in another hospital at the time. I'd had surgery on my neck. And when I came home, he was my caregiver. I didn't have anyone else. And he would leave with a friend and he'd be gone and I'd be left alone in the house. And I had a brace on. I wasn't able to get up and walk around. And I didn't get fed. And he'd have to take the brace off at night to unhook it. And he'd say, all I have to do is snap your neck and you'd be gone. He says, put you where Dad is. I had holes in my walls. And I had, carpet was ruined. And since I had fallen back and he is back in, he put a screen up to the window and with it just stapled. And he says when he moves out, he will take that out. He has not hit my door, nor has he hit my windows. He still controls my life. I still don't control my thermostat or my air conditioning. That he just blows up if I do. Last night I washed a load of clothes and I dried them and I was through about 20 after 9 and he was angry at me because I was using the dryer. Just recently he threw a clock because we had an argument and he was going into the bathroom and he picked up the clock and threw it at me.
In the meantime, he was taking over the control of my mind. It got to the point where I felt about 2 inches tall. Anything that I wanted to do, I had to ask permission with my own money. I'd see something in a catalog or in the newspaper and I'd say, is it okay if I order that? He was co-signer on my bank accounts. I had my check register was messed up. He got that. When the bills came in, we had a little container where we put the bills in. And at the beginning of each month, we'd take the bills out. He'd look at the bills, write the check and sign it, and then have me check it before I mailed it out. I wasn't even allowed to write a check. And I knew something was wrong, but a mother's a mother. You don't want to think that way.
It's a preview for a much longer film.
I was unable to avoid becoming a victim of elder abuse. Elder abuse comes in many, many different forms. Physical abuse, emotional abuse, and financial abuse. When it happens, you feel scared, disappointed, yes, and angry. And you can't believe that it's happening to you. You feel overwhelmed. When I asked for information, I was told that I couldn't have any information of my own. What the hell were you talking about? I was told it was none of my business. And that it's none of my business, and when you're told that, you're left to leave powerless. For years I suffered silently. I didn't want to tell anybody. I couldn't muster the courage. And you have to have courage I need help. And I knew I needed it. Even when I tried to speak up, I was told to shut up and be quiet. You don't know what you're talking about. it seemed that no one wanted to believe me. And if it can happen to me, oh, God willing it and unwilling it, it can happen to anyone. I know who I'm talking about. And I'm not speaking just for myself, of what I hope to be and what I was taken from me. I'm asking you to stop this of elderly abuse. I mean to stop it.
So I'm sure most of you know that was Mickey Rooney. And he testified before a special committee on aging around the authorization of the Elder Justice Act, which has been passed but not funded. He was abused by his stepson, which is not unusual. So, it's like it wants a permission from you. Do you have to press it? Oh, on that one. Okay, good. Sorry. Good. They're all a little different. Okay. Yes. Sorry.
If you look, there's a little thing blinking there. It's asking you for permission to let you use it. See that way down, the thing blinking at the bottom? Click on that. On the left.
No.
Oh, no, that's not, no, that's my script, so, which, I'm fine, we can let that happen too, but no, it's not working.
Well, I tried.
Well, no, I know, thank you, I appreciate it. I'm not sure, maybe the batteries aren't good, or did we just use it? Sorry, well, that's all right, well, but thank you very much for trying and, it's this little button here. One more time. No, but thanks.
I tried.
You did, and you're awesome.
Still awesome.
Still awesome.
Oh.
So, yeah.
No, it's not working.
So, a little bit, and again, I'm gonna just oh, look, Dennis Kelly's here. Hi, Dennis. Nice to see you.
I was just informed that Lynn brought me a thing.
Oh, well, let me get it for you. This is going so close. All right, so why you guys are here? So, here we are. So obviously you're here because you care about the people that you serve in your communities and in your churches. So today we're hoping that you will learn about the dynamics of elder abuse, that you'll understand the resources that are available to victims throughout the state, that you'll be able to recognize and respond to issues of elder abuse, and that you'll have strategies for prevention. So I want to just put a little pinpoint in that. We'll be happy to answer any questions. Dennis and I are presenting for the next 2 hours, pretty much at any time, so you can feel free to interrupt and ask a question if there's something burning that you need to know. But I also want to say that we're going to have a panel of folks at 11 o'clock who are going to talk about some of the great preventative initiatives that are going on around the state. And so we may just say, well, we only have so much time, so we're going to defer because that's going to be covered later on. So we're trying to offer some information in a sort of linear way, but so we may put off questions. And then ultimately hope that you'll join us in advocating for changes. And I'll just say the one thing that Lynn was talking about earlier. Actually, I knew for a long time that people who were victimized, elders who were victimized by certain people could not get a protection from abuse order. I knew that in 2007 when I modified the statute to include victims of stalking. But I didn't find out until after the process that victims of elder abuse couldn't get a protection order. And so that was, so we modified the statute to allow a victim of elder abuse to get a protection order if they were victimized by an extended family member or an unpaid caregiver, which really was terrific. And when I say advocate, that's because we'll need you sometimes to show up at the legislature, or if you can't show up at the legislature, to call your legislators or to help us talk to victims who may be victimized, because you're going to hear a little bit more from Dennis. We don't have great laws in Maine. And other states are way out ahead of us in relation to laws that address the issue of elder abuse. And so it's going to be a multi-year effort. Dennis and I were talking about that yesterday in the car. It might be a decade before Maine sees a law that is really comprehensive in addressing the issue of elder abuse. And that just means every single year we're going to put something in, going to keep educating legislators, and going to keep advancing the ball until we have the kind of laws in Maine that we want to have. But that's why I need you all to sort of get educated, become engaged, and then think about helping us advocate on this issue as we move forward, because it's the long haul. We're not going to fix this overnight. We're not going to fix it in a decade. But if we start now, we got to start somewhere, right? On this. So, why we're here? Lynn already stole my thunder. I think it's because she read my PowerPoint, actually. We're here because you all matter, and because you're what's called a trusted source. You are a trusted source, particularly for older people. The vast majority of people who are, 70 and older are affiliated with a religious institution. And they are much more likely to trust their religious leaders in seeking help if they're going to seek help than other people. So physicians and religious leaders are the ones. And so we're working very collaboratively with both of those groups to try to get information out. So you're critically important. And as Lynn said, unfortunately, most religious leaders don't know how to respond, and unfortunately can respond in a very bad way to disclosures of abuse if they don't sort of know what's available to help people. So we're really excited again that you're all here and that you're willing to take a very beautiful day out of your life to learn more about a very troubling subject. So I think it's important to ground ourselves in what others say, that we are losing our elders. The epidemic rarely talked about. We are losing our elders to an epidemic rarely talked about or even acknowledged. An epidemic that leaves some ashamed, some afraid, and too many dead. Before we talk more generally about elder abuse, I want to give you a good idea about what we're talking about as a demographic in Maine. We are, of course, the oldest state in the country by median age. Everybody knows that. But not everybody knows we're also the most rural state in the country. We actually have the second lowest 0 to 18 population, one of the lowest in migration. Not any of this is in there, but I think it's important to understand we have an old community, and we're old and we're getting older. We don't have a lot of young folks coming along, and one of the pieces of the puzzle that are so important is that because we've got a huge population of boomers, right, so baby boomers who are turning 65, they are retiring out of the workforce. They're retiring out of the healthcare force. They're retiring out of the direct care workforce, and we don't have a lot of people coming up underneath it. We don't have workers. We're not attracting business, not because our tax structure is so bad, but because of this problem. And people don't want to talk about this, but we can't attract workers to Maine, we can't attract business to Maine, because we don't have workers. And so we have this problem with an aging population who is in need of care, right? So we're not talking about nursing homes, we're just talking about a little bit of help. Getting out of bed, grocery shopping, travel, folks who need help, and they are reliant on others for this care. They're not going to be able to get a lot of direct care workers help because we don't have enough direct care workers. So they are going to be relying on friends and family. So I'm setting up the perfect storm here because it's important for you to understand that by necessity, I need my neighbor to take me to the grocery store, okay? Because I can't drive anymore. I don't have family in the area, and I need my neighbor to get me access to food. And that creates a vulnerability, right? If there's no one else to bring, I can't pay someone because I can't even find a direct care worker. So these are important things for us to understand, that we're setting up a system right now without addressing the long-term care system, which we're not doing a good job of. Home community-based care, real problem in Maine. We're forcing people to rely on the generosity of others, and that becomes that point where people can be taken advantage of. So, really important, other statistic that 38,000 people in Maine have dementia. That number is expected to grow to 55,000 in 7 years by 2020. We have one of the highest rates of Alzheimer's and dementia in this state, and a much higher than average death related to Alzheimer's than the national average. And 1 in 8 people aged 65 and older has Alzheimer's. So it's important because, again, creates a vulnerability in the people who are receiving care. Privilege of helping the state write the state plan on aging, and sat through 11 focus groups around the state, and to a person, they'll tell you right there, I don't like to ask for help. I want to do it myself, and by the way, I'm not old until I can't do it myself. 94-year-old woman, not old until I can't do it myself. Will not ask for help. That same woman said, you know, she lived in the county, said she was crossing her icy driveway, and her neighbor pulled in to get her mail. Right, to get her mail, to get to the mailbox. Neighbor pulled in, she said, you get back in that house. She said, you are never going to cross this driveway again. I'm going to come get your mail for you every day. And she said, I was so relieved. You know, she said, I fought a little bit, but I was so relieved because I was so afraid of falling. You know, and but you know, this is the mentality we're dealing with. You know, I'm going to do it myself. You know, I'm not going to ask for help. I'm going to do it myself until I get hurt, unfortunately. So they're reliant on others, as we just talked about, for care. 230,000 people in Maine are providing informal care, and this will not be the first time I say most caregivers are awesome. Awesome, super awesome, amazingly awesome, okay? We're going to talk about the fact that a lot of caregivers are abusers, but most are not. I think it's really important as we go along in talking about this stuff, to realize that it's a small percentage of people who are abusing the people they're taking care of, and most caregivers are fantastic, and we could not do this without them. So I don't want anybody thinking that I think caregivers are villains, because I think they are angels and heroes. So, so hard to remember to do all these things, and remember what I'm supposed to say. So 1 in 9, so this is a 2012 Department of Justice statistic, came out early last year. 1 in 9 people over the age of 60 will be a victim of elder abuse or financial exploitation this year. And that translates into about 33,000 people in Maine. It's really hard to imagine. You know, we used to, when I was doing this stuff back in 2002, we used to say we thought the estimate was about 14,000 Mainers every year. Apparently, we were off by half. But, you know, that was a decade ago, and unfortunately, as our country ages and our older population becomes more vulnerable, the numbers are rising. And, you know, it's also important to think, as we talk about this, everyone in this room is thinking, This is not gonna happen to me, couldn't happen to me. And I'll tell you that it could happen to any of you, no matter how old you are. If you become disabled tomorrow and reliant on someone for their care, for your care, you are now in a very, very vulnerable situation. Period. You know, from anyone who provides care.
When you talk exploitation, are you talking about the telephone and the?
I will come to that in a second. She was asking exploitation, are we talking about telephone? And financial exploitation is a unique situation, and well, let me, hold on for 1 second. And hold that thought, we're gonna get right to it. And then I really want to emphasize this. Go ahead. Oh, 1.3 million. Sure. Any other demographic questions I can help with? It's a ridiculous amount of information in here. So older adults who are abused and neglected are 3 times more likely to die in the next decade than those who are not. Does that make any sense to anybody? Right? Stress, the stress of being victimized often very quickly leads to medical problems. Unfortunately, and we have seen this before far too many times, withholding of medication is a big thing. And then your heart condition worsens. And you have a heart attack or a stroke, and you become institutionalized, and you're done. You lose all your money, you lose your house, you have to go on Maine care, you actually get a penalty for having someone stolen your money. It's, you know, there's just so much that happens when you become a victim, and we're going to talk about why that impacts you so much. But it's a big thing. So important to know those things. So this is elder abuse. At its core, it is the misuse of a trusted relationship. And that's by the way my definition. It's not any other definition. I'm not an expert really, but when I boil it down, that's what it is. It's a misuse of a trusted relationship. And it can take many forms: financial exploitation, neglect, sexual abuse, stalking, emotional abuse, intentional isolation, as you see on this slide. And that is, it very often can be intentional isolation from a religious community because you are support for people, remarkably. So for victims of domestic violence, it is the employer. So right, being employed is a big threat to abusers. In this instance, having a connection to people who might be able to see something and say something and help is a real problem. So we want to isolate our victim from anybody who can help them. That's what, if we're a good abuser, that's what we're doing. Okay? So, yes, sir.
That's the verbal abuse.
Well, I include that in emotional abuse. That is the form of, I'm sorry, but yeah, that's the form of emotional abuse typically is verbal abuse. So it's belittling comments, threats, all of those things go along in emotional abuse. We're going to talk about all these things more. So, and by the way, Dennis is going to talk a lot about financial exploitation. So I'll answer the question now as we are, well, one more section, because I'm gonna get to financial exploitation. So everyone over 60 is a potential victim. Elder abuse obviously spans all socioeconomic and religious backgrounds. It happens to both men and women. And by the way, very clear, sexual assault happens to both men and women in relation to elder abuse. I'm going to talk a lot about sexual assault, and Sue Prayer will be here later to talk a lot about sexual assault. Both competent and incompetent elders, and both dependent elders and independent elders. So don't make assumptions that this is only happening to people who are cognitively impaired or who are completely disabled. There are lots and lots of people who are living independently, making decisions and looking just fine on the outside, whose sons are stealing them blind and threatening them if they say anything. And again, that's much more like the dynamic of domestic violence, right? Right? So, people who are abused in their personal relationships, interpersonal violence, often or not, people always say, well, it's the choice. Why don't we just get out? Well, if somebody's saying, I'm going to kill you if you leave, that happens a lot in elders with independent people. I am going to kill you if you tell somebody that I'm taking your money. Really? You saw in the video, he threatened to snap my neck. Now, she was dependent, but it happened. So it's really important to not make assumptions about who victims are. Anybody can be a victim of elder abuse. And it's really important that we know that. All right, now I'm going to talk about financial exploitation. Finally, 90% of abusers are family members and caregivers. 90%. And that number, again, has grown. It used to be, he said, 75 to 80%. Department of Justice says, no, it's 90%. So we're not talking about a lot of stranger abuse or institutional abuse, right? We're talking about people who are typically at home, reliant on others for care, who are being abused in all these myriad of ways. So, yes, elder abuse can take the form of financial exploitation by external people, but it is a very, very small percentage of people. We hear about that more often because there are more numerous sources that can report around financial exploitation of scams, and we've seen some really bad, big scams in Maine. We had just last year 3 women in southern Maine lost over $100,000 each to this Jamaican scam, and it's terrible the way it happens. And there is a real undue influence that's placed on folks in relation to how that works. And it's a horrible thing, but it's a much lesser financial exploitation of strangers. It's a teeny part of the problem. And it's mostly financial exploitation. It really is kids and grandkids who are stealing old people's money. It's not scammers. So it's just really, really, really important for you to know that. Let's see. Abusers. They use tactics of fear and intimidation. And then, we'll just get right to it. The number one, you're going to go to a home. So that's your number one thing. You're not going to be able to stay. How many people want to grow old and die in a nursing home? Come on, hands up. Nobody? What? I don't understand. Well, that's right. Like 100% of people. This is not, they actually do statistics, no offense, but they actually do research on these things. They're like, really? You needed to pay somebody to tell you that we all want to die at home? Surrounded by the people who love us and in the comfort of our own homes and communities. We all want to age well in our homes and in our communities. And we're realistic. As a people, we're realistic to say sometimes we might not be able to stay in our homes, but then I want to go to a nice place, an assisted living facility in my town, right? I mean, we want to be in our town where our support systems are, right? So this is really deep in our hearts, right? This is who we are and what we want, and that's the threat that really gets to people. If you complain about what's happening to you, no matter what it is, you're not going to be believed. You're going to tell people that you're having problems with your thinking, and you're going to go home. You're going to go home. Lose everything. You're going to be separated from your community and the people that you love. Threats of violence and actual use of violence is certainly another one. And again, as you become more and more frail, those threats are bigger and bigger and bigger. Just as an aside, I love to connect these things, right? So what's the other thing that older people who are frail are most worried about? Falling! Indeed. Exactly right. I didn't go to one of these focus groups, the 11 ones I had, where there wasn't somebody who said, there's that woman who died on her floor. She was dead for 3 days. Every single focus group, Somebody raised it. It is an ethos. With older, frail folks, they are terrified of falling. And so if you've got a violent person who threatens you, you know, I could just push you. You're just going to break your hip and you're going to go to the hospital. I mean, these are real threats that have a different meaning to people who are frail because they already have this fear. So then you have people who are playing on that fear, right? And we all know what happens because it's there. It's like this ethos. I've already said refuses to care for a dependent person. We had a case in the Office of the Attorney General with a woman who had signed over her Social Security to her son, who then, and he had a power of attorney. He was supposed to pay all of her bills. He didn't. He used 100% of her money for things that he wanted to use the money for, including not paying for her medication. Her lights got turned out, and so she had to go upstairs because she couldn't see well. By 7 o'clock, she had to go to bed because she had no lights, and she didn't have heart medication, and she lost her house, and within about 8 months, she died of a heart attack. You know, these are real situations, and again, we're going to talk about why somebody is willing to live in that situation for so very long, and to have those consequences as a result of them. So isolates victims. We talked about that. It is the standard issued operating procedure, pretty much for all types of abuse. Isolation, right? So these are the same. Is any of this sounding familiar around child abuse and neglect, domestic violence? You know, I mean, there's a tremendous parallel, right? You take somebody who's vulnerable, you make threats that matter to them, you isolate them from people who can protect them, and you get to do whatever it is you want to do. Why does elder abuse occur? Power and control, which is very standard issue reasons. People who are domestic violence abusers, unfortunately, who use power and control to abuse their partners, also, by the way, care for their aging relatives, and use the exact same tactics to get what they want. That's that you use power and control because it gets you what you want. Right? So I want your money. I want you to stay out of my life. If I have to take care of you, I just don't want you to be a problem. Right? You can go live in that room, but that's it. Don't you dare ask me to, pick up your medicine, buy your food, or take care of you. So it's and then there's greed and entitlement. The entitlement thing is very sketchy, right? Because we're all good people, and as I said, there's a lot of mostly all good caregivers, but caregivers can really get themselves into a mindset of, I'm the only one here taking care of mom, and this is really hard. You ever taken care of somebody with dementia? This is really, really, really hard. It's taken over my life. I had to quit my job. I don't do anything. I don't do anything that I like anymore. And my sisters and brother are living in other states, and they're living their lives, and they don't know how hard this is for me. And it's okay, because I should be able to use a little bit of entertainment, because I'm working so hard. It's this weird little justification that probably many of you in this room would say, yeah, that's right. That's right, those no good siblings of hers, they shouldn't get a damn thing, right? Because she's doing all the work, taking care of mom, she's doing a good job. But the deal is, you don't get to take somebody's money without their permission. It's pretty straightforward. All of a sudden the tables are turned, and abusive dad, who used to beat the crap out of you, sorry. God, it's getting filmed, I was not gonna say something. Okay, yeah. Anyway, all of a sudden, you're taking care of him, and he's vulnerable. Maybe you kind of have that, anger. You've never dealt with your feelings around this. You've got a lot of resentment about how you were treated. And you're not gonna hit him or anything. But yeah, maybe he should know what it's like to miss a meal from time to time. But you know what, he made you do that. I mean, there's a lot of this stuff that goes on, right? I mean, we've got a lot of mental health problems in Maine. We've got a lot of people who haven't done their work around, their past childhood traumas. And now all of a sudden, you're taking care of the very person who did these bad things to you. These things. Yes, Dennis.
I think the breakdown of the social contract, I think that's part of it. And that intergenerational respect for the elderly, definitely.
Yes, absolutely. Dennis is right. The breakdown of the social contract. It's a fair way of saying it. And yes, I mean, that is the big nut to crack, right? By the way, in any of these things that we're talking about, domestic violence, underage drinking, which I did a whole lot of those things, before obviously you can tell. It's about changing the culture, and that work takes obviously decades and decades and decades. It's changing the culture we got here. We can get out. We have to start somewhere, but it's going to take an awful long time to shift. We can't just say, hey, you know what? You really should respect your elders and do everything you can to protect them. Nice idea, but that's not where we are now.
Another focus is on elder abuse and recognizing all of that. Are we not sometimes able that attention between the and the as you care or visit people and they have family in this place? It's hard to sort of separate out what is the other. So there's a loss of autonomy, but maybe yes, and not in the abuse way, versus
Sure.
separating that from the situations that you're truly.
Sure, I mean, and Dennis is gonna talk a little bit about the probate situation. I mean, thankfully in Maine, we've come to a different place around legally recognizing the importance of the autonomy of the person. And it used to be, and I think you've got some stuff out here around guardianship stuff as well. It used to be that if somebody wanted to become a guardian of you and we went in, and they would get 100% ability to control every part of your life. And that almost never happens anymore. It used to be like 100% of the time. Okay, 99% of the time you used to get this full guardianship is what it's called, which means I control your whole life and I get to put you in a home anytime I want. And now it's like, 5% of the time a full guardianship is issued. It's very, very seldom. And so the nice part about it is that our probate courts now are really respecting the autonomy of the human and are narrowly crafting guardianship orders so that you only get to make decisions about finances, for instance, or you only get to make decisions around healthcare. So, we're making some advances in that way, but the short answer is we're probably not going to talk a lot about that today because it could be a whole nother subject. The reality is that if the court's involved and has issued a guardianship and a person has been institutionalized by virtue of that guardianship, that's not abuse. I mean, there's a legal process that's been involved, and that's not to say that the process can't be abused, and it certainly has. So I'm not saying that, but we're talking about a whole nother process that, anyway, probably not as much as you would like. How about that? So, yeah, caregiver stress. I just want to talk a little bit about that because, what we just talked about is, caregiving is really, really hard, as I said. It is overwhelming and exhausting, and anybody who's ever done it knows that. But, probably a lot of you are parents and or caregivers for kids. There are a lot of parents who are caregivers of autistic children, of children who have mental and physical impairments, and we've long since recognized that taking care of a child who is difficult does not entitle you to hit them or to deprive them of things. And so we, unfortunately, it's a biased thing. Too quickly we say, oh, well, that person is just experiencing too much stress. in providing care for that person. They're being so altruistic that we kind of want to look past some of the things that maybe they're not doing. So it's not an excuse. It's not an excuse. Caregiver stress is not an excuse for abuse. With that said, caregiver stress is real, and there are lots of supports and services for caregivers. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but I think it's, one of the things that you can all do is make sure that if you see a struggling caregiver, that you connect that person with adequate supports and services to help them address the issues, just out of the goodness of your heart, by the way, because too many caregivers neglect their own health, their emotional health, their spiritual health, their physical health, and the number, healthcare provider will tell you the number of people that they see who are caregivers who die before the people they're caring for is outrageous. So it is overwhelming. It is extraordinarily stressful. There are great supports and services for caregivers, and please know what they are and how to connect people with those services. And also, please never allow caregiving to be an excuse for treating someone in a horrible way. So, why are seniors vulnerable? Well, they're good-hearted people, typically. They're very trusting, typically. Certainly came from a different generation, particularly our old. They're often reliant on others for care. They often have assets. They often don't make good decisions, by the way, around their assets, which is another thing you guys can help with, is that a lot of times if they need a caregiver, they choose their ne'er-do-well child to come live with them. So, there's no blame here, I'm just saying, oh, Johnny, he doesn't have a place to live. I'll let him come live with me, he can take care of things. So, and then, Johnny, and we see this all the time. Johnny, who's never been able to manage his finances, never been able to hold down a job, has a drinking problem, has a violence problem, been in and out of jail. I want that person to come take care of me. But you're a mom, right? You're a mom or you're a dad, you love this kid. And you are sad that he's never done well, and you want to continue to help him, right? Because that is your job as a mom or dad, is to continue to help your kids. We can talk about that, we can argue about what's right or wrong, but that is, in the core of who we are. We want to take care of our kids. So some folks don't make the best decisions about who they choose as a caregiver or who they choose to take care of their finances. And that's their right, by the way, autonomy. That is their right. And some of this stuff with elder abuse, I've had people call me and say, a good friend of mine who was a district attorney, I said, my friend is taking advantage of his mother, and she's letting him. And he's, unrolled this whole theory. And I said, Jay, that's just her choice. She gets to make bad decisions, and we have to be all right with that. She's fully competent. She's independent, living independent. She's not actually dependent on him. And if she's letting him take all her money, then we have to let people make bad decisions. And the law does. And everybody agrees we have to let people make bad decisions. So there's a line. There's a line that we have to respect. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So let's see. And as I mentioned, we've got a lot of dementia. And wow, medication. We could talk also all day about prescription drugs. We're not done. But we have people who are all but in comas because of the 20 drugs they're on. And so, medication, dependency on medication for various problems creates a real vulnerability because, somebody else controlling that medication and your fear that you are going to die if you don't get that medication really is an encouragement to do whatever this person wants you to do because they are controlling the medication and if you don't get it, you're going to die. You don't want to die. So you're willing to do whatever it is they want you to do. What to look for? So, sudden changes in personality, hygiene, fear of certain people, social isolation. So we talked about somebody who's come to your church religiously, as they say, every Sunday for, the last 35 years. and they're not coming anymore, and they're in good health. And that might be a big red flag for you to say, well, maybe I should worry about this person. Check in on them, see how they're doing, see if there's anything wrong. Change in routines, anxiety, fearfulness, swift decline in health, sudden loss of ability to meet their financial obligations. Even things like she's always had a new car. You know, every 2 years she gets a new car, and all of a sudden she doesn't. She's driving some beat-up-old, Toyota, and her son, who's just moved in, has a new car. And he's getting a new car every 2 years, and she's driving this thing. It's a change, It's a real change, and it's not something that this person has ever done or been comfortable with. And now something is really different. So it can be something as subtle as that you might notice, you might talk to somebody about. Malnourishment, loss of hope, stating problems with caregivers. And that sort of is this coded disclosure as well. It's that, they're telling you that something's going on just by how they're talking about this person and their relationship with this person. And this person is providing their care, or the victim is dependent on this person's care. And they're kind of telling you, things aren't really that great with this person who's providing care for me. Or I'm anxious about it, or I'm nervous about what's happening. Some people will start to tell you. So why it's hard to seek help? I mean, I honestly have been covering a lot of this as we've been going through, but the number one reason, of course, is they're dependent on the abuser for their care. They fear the loss of independence and autonomy. As I said, they really fear institutionalization. But the big one that we've sort of talked about is, I love my son. I love my grandchild, right? I sure as heck don't want that person to get in trouble. I don't want them to go to jail. I don't want to call the police. I just want the abuse to stop, right? I don't really know how, but I want the abuse. I don't want to get them in trouble. I don't want myself. So that's a big problem. And then shame. It's the other side of this. How could my child do this to me? Shame is so big. Shame is so big. How could something like this happen to me? Right? I have always been independent, confident, taking care of my own stuff. How does this happen? How does that happen? How did it happen? The child that I raised. What will somebody think of me? So we can go into that. That's a whole nother, that fear of what people think, the judgment thing, is a big problem. But it's real, and we have to accept it. So